Thank you for the introduction, Jigo. Very happy to be here. This is joint work with Yifan Yan, who is a doctoral student at Stanford. This paper really is about information. How informed consumers are at the time of decision making is very important. So there's a lot of research on the effect of exposure to information, how does it impact decisions, and so forth. And that is very broad, all across marketing, economics, and politics. What we want to talk about in this paper, and what we want to delve into this paper, is the fact that the recall of information at the time of decision making is constrained, right? It's constrained and it's systematically constrained. And the exposure of information affects that recall, which can really predict what people do after in the decision making time. So we studied this in the context of auto insurance. There is a reason we picked auto insurance. It was not very easy to find data on it, but we stuck around for a long time to find this data set. And the reason is that auto insurance is one category which is very, very highly advertised in the US. One of the most advertised brands is Geico over here. This Geico is, according to Advertising Age, almost universally recognized in the US. There's 100% recognition of the Geico. Any given year since 2009, Geico is among the top 10 advertisers in the US. This is also, and Progressive is not too far behind. If Geico spends $2 billion, Progressive spends $1.8 billion. So this is like, both of them are in top 10, and the others are very close. And the amount of spending on these ads is equivalent to, if you translate that spending into impressions of online banner ads, that's equivalent to about 1,000 impressions per adult in the US in a given year. And this has been going on for decades. At the same time, this category is very, very highly regulated. It's not the most innovative product. So somebody in the previous talk showed novel categories. Auto insurance is not one of them. So this is very highly regulated. The ads are very, very standard. They just talk about price and just invite people to come and get a quote from the website. Right? So that's the setting that we are looking at. Okay, so when we think about advertising, the primary model, the primary view to think about advertising is that advertising provides information about a product or its characteristics. It just reminds people or tells people something about the product. So that view has a very hard time predicting why very, very mature brands, so all the auto insurance companies are more than 80 years old, so they're more than a few generations old companies. So these are not new companies. So this view has a hard time predicting or explaining why auto insurance would be one of the most advertised brands in the US. Then on the other hand, we have this alternative view, which is advertising can provide utility. So what is utility? Advertising can change people's attitudes towards a product. Advertising can provide some prestige or some change in preference for the product. So if you see an ad for Geico talking about Geico, so you are more likely to like Geico for some reason. So this is a very, very general model. So it doesn't put a lot of restrictions on the data. So it helps us justify what happened in the past, but it doesn't help us talk much about what's going to happen in the future because we don't know very well when attitude is going to change, when it's not going to change. So for that reason, this is not, it predicts a lot of findings. For example, one of the things you might think is that there is diminishing return to advertising, so it can predict in some situations advertising effects are very large. In many other situations, it can explain advertising effects are very small. Right? So this heterogeneity can be explained by these models. However, there are many aspects which are hard to explain. So one of them is that these models do not predict the duration of the effect. So is the effect going to be for 1 day, 2 days, 2 months? There is nothing that we can say from these models. The second thing is in recent research, we have seen that sometimes advertising effects are just not diminishing. We can see complementary effects even at very, very high levels. That's another thing that these models have a very hard time explaining. And then it's not impossible to explain using the utility framework, but still it's very hard to explain why the largest spenders on advertising would be very, very mature and very well-known, highly recognized companies. Right? So that's not very easy to explain using these views. So what we do in this paper is we look at cognitive psychology. So we look at memory research, where there is a lot of research on how forgetting happens, how recall of information takes place, and how it is systematic. In this literature, and this literature is more than a century and a quarter old, this is not new. The standard view in this literature is that forgetting happens when somebody tells you something new about the same thing. So for example, in this context, forgetting of Geico is going to happen. So what is forgetting here? It's just that Geico is going to be less salient in your mind if you see a progressive ad, and progressive gets less salient in your mind when you see a Geico ad. So new information replaces old information in recall, so there's just recalling of that information becomes hard. And this forgetting is going to have an implication. It's going to tell us that forgetting is, interference is going to have an implication that forgetting is not exogenous. I can make you forget about something and you can make me forget about something, and this can lead to an advertising war where we just build upon and keep advertising to compete for the share of memory in the consumer's mind. So the first scientific research in this, published in this area is from 1900. That's not a typo, it's actually 1900. There's a lot of work in the lab. We want to see the actual empirical part. Is it relevant for decision making? What do we lose if we don't take into account this mechanism? That's what we want to do in this paper. So these are research questions. Does competitive interference, is it significant? How can we actually measure its effects? What are its unique implications which are testable? And what happens if we ignore this mechanism? Okay, so in the paper, we get into the details. We write down a model and generate precise predictions about what to expect in the data given this particular mechanism. Today, I'm going to show you the data only. So I'll just build some intuition about what the effect should be, and then we'll jump right into the data and see what we are looking at in auto insurance. Okay, so what should we expect because of competitive interference when firm A advertises? People are less likely to, at any given time, people are less likely to think about firm B. So there is, the advertising of firm A is going to suppress the recall of firm B. That's going to be the first implication. And because of that, firm A's advertising is going to increase the efficacy of firm B's advertising. So it's going to make it more likely that firm B's ad effects are larger. So even in a place where there's a lot of advertising, when competitors advertise, my ad effects increase. So the diminishing returns that we usually think about, there's an omitted variable over there, which is the competitor's advertising. There will be diminishing returns, but if competitors advertise, the diminishing returns go away. There are higher returns from repeating the same ads exposure again and again. Another implication that we draw using the model in the paper is that the impact on competitors is not going to be the most negative on the day of exposure. Why is that? Because when you see the ads, let's say Geico advertises, it reminds you of Geico, but it also reminds you of the auto insurance category. So on the day of the exposure, the impact on competitors is a little less. But the next day, when the exposure is gone, the impact on competitors is higher. And this prediction is unique. So the utility models, the typical ad stock model cannot make this prediction, because over there, when you have the biggest boost, the competitors lose the most. So that's the another prediction that we have. Okay. So just a brief background. I've talked about some of these things already. Auto insurance is the category we'll be looking at. There's just a lot of spending in auto insurance advertising. These are very, very mature brands. None of them, so the top four, which have 50% of the premium, none of them is new. There are very few new auto insurance companies. The newest one is 80 years plus old. And all of them spent a lot on advertising. Geico is the leader, and it's just a lot of ads for that. So although auto insurance is a complicated product, the ads are very, very simple. It's repetitive. There's one mascot typically, and they talk about price, or some other, just one attribute that they talk about. And the biggest advertisers, they talk about price only. And the call to action usually is to come to the website and they get a quote and start the process. Okay, and there is universal recognition of these ads and the mascots. So that just confirms that these are just saturated. People just have seen a lot of these ads. Okay, So the spending on advertising in auto insurance was not always so high. So in this picture, what we're doing is we are plotting spending by Geico and Progressive, which are the top two advertisers from the 1990s up to today. So in the 1990s, there was very little auto insurance advertising. And there is popular media on this. There's an NPR Planet Money episode on the Geico effect, which talks about the serendipity that happened at that time. Geico started advertising, and then Progressive followed up, and then now everybody is doing an ARPA. So now there are months when $30 million are spent by one company on advertising. In 1990s, it was close to the orders of magnitude. Okay, all right, so what do we want to do now? We want to look at the effect of advertising for auto insurance. We know from the literature that measuring the effects of advertising is very, very hard. And that's because if we compare people who see an ad with people who don't see an ad, they're just systematically different because of a lot of reasons. So we need a randomized experiment. So what we do is we get data from a randomized field experiment in which one of the top auto insurance companies' ads is going to be randomized. Now, we just don't want that. We want to be able to measure outcomes on other companies also. So we want to be able to link advertising exposure of one company with outcomes for other companies. And to look at interaction effects, we want other companies' advertising to also be varying at the same time. So we need much more than simply measuring the effects of advertising. So what we did, we partnered with a major platform. So they own a top 5 website in the world. So there's one portal on which an auto insurance company is running one of their advertising campaigns. It's just a business as usual advertising campaign. The same ad that they show everywhere, they're showing on that particular day of our experiment also. And this platform happens to own a browser plugin and add-on. What happens is that people who've installed that browser plugin, their data on whatever browsing they do on the internet gets recorded. And now we see exposure to our focal companies. Let's call it Progressive for the purpose of the talk. Progressive's ad is something that they're going to see, and now we can see which companies they actually go to, which companies they visit, and when they become customers of any particular company. And we have up to the market level the location information on these individuals, so we are able to match every individual in our data with the DMA, the market, and therefore past TV advertising from all companies for that particular individual. Okay, so our experiment is very, very simple. It happened on one day. On that particular day, Progressive, for the purpose of the talk, took over this website. So what that really means is that any person who goes to the website sees a Progressive banner with Flo talking about the fact that you can save $500 for switching to Progressive. The treatment group individuals see Progressive's ad. Control group individuals, they see a public service announcement, which has nothing to do with auto insurance. And this is randomized, people are randomized into one of these two groups. Okay, let's dive into the data now. So what I'm plotting over here is the likelihood of you visiting the advertiser, so Progressive's website on any given day. So the x-axis are days, and the y-axis is the proportion of people in the sample that go to the advertiser's website on that day. Okay? So typically 2,000 people search for auto insurance on any given day. The red curve over here is the control group. These are the people who saw on that particular day. Everything else is the same for them, but on that day, they saw public service announcement. So this marginal ad impression is what we are changing. The blue one is the treatment group that saw Progressive's banner. And what we see over here is the main thing, the one thing to see over here is that on that particular day, there is a huge lift in the proportion of people going to Progressive's website. Now that's one thing. The other thing is that if we look at the later points in time, just after that there is no difference. Before that there is no difference. And then after some time the difference reappears. And this is going to be statistically significant, I'll show you in a minute. Okay? It reappears later and then it sticks around for a while and then it disappears. The first thing we do is we compare these effects with, yes, go for it.
So those periodic peaks, are they like Sundays or something?
They're not. I'll show you what they are. That's going to be the focus of what we do in a bit. Okay? So the first thing we do is we compare our effects with what we know from the literature. So there are a lot of meta-analyses that have been done on the effects of online ads. the median lift that we expect going in, if we, this is one of the recent papers that shows the distribution of lifts on visits to advertisers' websites. The median is 30%, and what we are finding is 300%. So our effect is just very, very large. So this is one of the largest advertisers, oldest companies, and one of the highest ad effects. So that's the first thing we want to see. Then we test how long do the ad effects really last in the future. So what we have over here is the day of the exposure. This is something you already saw from the picture. We pull all the data month after the ad exposure, and we see that there is an effect. 2 months after, there's still an effect, and then the effect disappears. Okay, so there is something going on even after that. So that ad impression that happened, it carries on, and the effect lingers on for up to 2 months. So there is some effect going forward as well. The day of the ad exposure is very, very important, but if you add up all of these, that becomes almost the same. So the future is also almost as much important. So the clicks is definitely not the full coverage of the effect of advertising. Okay. So now we look at the competitive dynamic that I was talking about. So on the day of the ad exposure, this is something you already saw. This is visits to competitors on the day of the exposure. So what we see is that competitors don't get much difference on the day of the exposure. There's a little negative, but it's not even detectable. It's not much difference over here. However, if you go to the next day, the ad effect decreased, which is what you expect. The ad effect now is very, very small for the advertiser, but the competitors are now getting the negative effect. Okay, the competitors didn't get the negative effect earlier, but now they're seeing the negative effect, which is consistent with our memory-based model. All right. So now coming closer to what Seethu was asking. So what happens is, after our experiment ran, 3 weeks after that, Major League Baseball season started in the US. So people watch baseball for a lot of reasons. When I look at it, I'm looking at Geico, right? So one feature of the beginning of the season is that auto insurance companies advertise a lot in baseball. Right? So here is one example. Here is from the opening day. I'm not sampling over here. This is just the opening day of the Major League Baseball season. Behind the backer, you see auto insurance companies over there, and these stick around for. So these ads are not like 30-second commercials. They stick around for minutes sometimes. And if you are State Farm and you're buying this static banner behind the background, this is sticking around for the whole day. Right? So there's a lot of exposure to Progressive's competitors on the opening weekend of the Major League Baseball season. And the viewership of MLB is the highest in the opening weekend. That's also something that we confirm. So what we now want to do is we want to look at the carryover effect of that advertising, how it changes before and after the MLB season starts. Okay, that's where we are going. So on the week before the season began, the difference between control and treatment was almost zero. So it's undetectable. So at that time, if we were looking at the effects were gone, but there's nothing left. Okay? But after the Major League Baseball season starts, the effect reappears. So we see there's a difference now. So the competitors are now advertising, reminding people of the category. The strength of the memory association that was established earlier is now taking effect systematically. So now we see that while the control group saw a dip, the treatment group held up to its effect. So therefore, the treatment effect is high. Okay? And we split up our sample into those who are in a market where MLB is popular. So there is a lot of variation in the US. In certain markets like San Antonio, Texas, and Austin, Texas, there's no baseball team, so the viewership is very low. So we do a median split of our sample, high MLB popularity markets, low MLB popularity markets. As we expect, the impact is higher and only there in markets where MLB is popular. It's not there in below median markets. So it's mainly happening in certain situations where competitor advertising is really taking place. All right. So this is us looking at the carryover effects, the longer term effects of advertising. So now we look at the past advertising that competitors have done. Okay. So because in our data we can identify the location, the market where the individual is. So from that we know the advertising that competitors had done previously in that person's market, and then we have variation over there. So what we do in this in this slide is we regress the likelihood of an individual going to Progressive is a focal advertiser, going to progressive.com on the day of the exposure, and how it varies with Progressive's own past advertising and how it varies with competitors' past advertising. And we see that while if you advertise in the past, your ad effect decreases. So there's some substitution between the TV advertising that you did and the banner ad that you're showing today. So if you had done a lot of advertising in the past, you don't need to do additional today. However, if the competitors had done a lot of advertising, that really increases your ad's effect. And these are standardized numbers for local advertising, so this effect is positive and much significant. So this is very robust. We can put in much more controls, and then this effect persists. So this competitive interaction is so large that if we replace that, if we take the right side of the previous regression, fill in all the advertising that competitors do, our treatment effect will disappear. So what that really means is that if competitors stop their advertising, the treatment effect will just almost disappear. This marginal banner, the 1,000th impression in the past year is not going to do anything, but it does a lot because of competitive advertising. So in the paper, then we do a survey of the memory literature. They have modifiers, moderators that they actually look at. One of the moderators they look at is age. So they look at the impact of retention of memory for 30-year-olds versus 60-year-olds. And we have that variation in the data because we have people's ages as well. And what we see is that for the older populations, the effect is mainly on the day of the exposure, and it dips and disappears later on. But as for the younger population, the effect is smaller on the day, but the carryover is much higher later on, right? So all these effects are consistent with what we find in the memory literature. And having visited the Progressive in the past does not mean that there's going to be no effect on Progressive today. That's because people have, buying process is long, and people have unfinished business when they leave the website. They forget about, so Progressive is not on top of their mind. They still need this ad to go back to Progressive and then do what they were doing. Question? Yeah.
Just a quick clarification. Suppose you did this research not on Progressive and they're the leaders in the field, but some other secondary. Do you think that the competitive effect might be as strong, or is it more for the people who are more likely to be in the consideration set where these effects might be much larger? So there might be limits to the generalizability.
Yeah. So I think this is a great question, right? So by showing this, we don't mean that other effects of advertising are not there, right? So if one of the, a very small auto insurance company who nobody remembers, their ad is going to have this awareness effect as well, right? So in this case, we are focusing explicitly on very, very large, well-known brands, which take up a significant share of overall spending on advertising total, right? So we want to show the prevalence and the significance of this phenomenon for those settings.
The question is with the managerial implication.
Yeah.
So the first order thing might be, hey, I'm going to get all these benefits from all my competitors that are advertising because I'm all going to be aware. But that effect may not be there for the smaller players, and so the benefit of this might be somewhat asymmetric. Is that something that managers should be thinking about?
So our model will make predictions about that, right? So we can look at that also. What is the effect of advertising? So if nobody knows a particular company, then competitor interference is just not a big deal, right? Nobody knows you anyway, so forgetting doesn't happen. So the effect on advertising is going to be low for those. Okay, so then what we do in the paper, and I'm not going to show the model over here, we estimate the very well-known ad stock model. So in the quantitative marketing literature, the workhorse model of advertising is that advertising adds to the ad stock, and the ad stock decays over time. So we estimate the ad stock model, so the ad stock model is more flexible, it has more parameters. We estimate our memory model, we estimate both of them. We look at out-of-sample predictions, so we estimate these models using 2 days of the experiment on the next day, which can estimate all the parameters. And we predict from these models, competitive interactions, and the ad stock model gives us the opposite sign, whereas the memory model gives us the right sign. The ad stock model says that competitors' advertising will actually decrease the effect of my advertising, but the memory model is able to make the right predictions directionally and also quantitatively very well. All right. So to conclude, when we think about the effect of information, the effect of advertising in our context, one view to think about it is if people are already aware, if I've shown an ad, if I've talked to people about something, showing it again is not going to be very important. However, the impact of information, especially showing the same thing again, is not going to be very impactful. However, exposure to information is not just for telling people something new, but also to make people think about this over other things. So there is this competition that goes on when retrieval for recall happens in the consumer's memory, which is the standard way by which cognitive psychology thinks about information recall and forgetting. It's not a side model, but it is the main model of thinking about recall. So in this paper, what we do is we evaluate that particular mechanism in the context of auto insurance. And this is a category where we specifically chose this category because a lot of advertising happens, most advertised category in the US, and we find evidence for this mechanism. Competitors' advertising makes it less likely that people think about one particular product, and therefore the effect of advertising increases when competitors advertise, and what's going on is that one company is making the other one advertise, and we have a lot of combative advertising going on over here. So that's one.